Finland and Sweden are ready to apply to join NATO in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Finland's president and prime minister made the announcement Sunday at a press conference. Prime Minister Sanna Marin said joining NATO will provide certain security guarantees to Finland.
Everything has changed when Russia attacked Ukraine, and I personally think that we cannot trust anymore that there will be a peaceful future next to Russia with our own. That's why we're making the decisions to joining NATO. It's an act of peace that there would ever again be war in Finland in the future. We have had wars with Russia, and we don't want that kind of future for ourselves, for our children. And this is why we're making these decisions today and upcoming week, so there would never again be war in Finland.
Russian President Vladimir Putin warned Finland Saturday that relations between the two countries could be, quote, negatively affected by a NATO application. Russia and Finland share an 800-mile border. Sweden's ruling party also announced their plan to join NATO on Sunday. Sweden has not been militarily aligned with any other country in 200 years. Meanwhile, NATO members gathered in Berlin on Sunday to discuss the ongoing war in Ukraine. The alliance also discussed Finland and Sweden's desire to join the group. The Secretary General of NATO called the move historic. CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tayyab joins me now from Finland. Imtiaz, welcome. You were at the press conference with the Finnish president and prime minister, and you questioned them about the impact of their decision to apply to NATO. Let's watch.
In your call with President Biden, did he give you any assurances of military or other support beyond the U.S.'s NATO obligations now that Finland is poised to join that alliance? And for the Prime Minister, the nuclear threat from Russia is, of course, a concern. Does joining NATO make Finland more vulnerable to that threat?
I have no doubts about support from USA. And I thanked, actually, President Biden.
About the question of nuclear threat, we wouldn't make these decisions that we are making now if we didn't think that they are enhancing and strengthening our security.
Imtiaz, what else did the Finnish leaders have to say?
Well, Anna, they said it's a historic day, a day meant to maximize, in their words, their security here in the country. But you played that interesting clip of the Finnish prime minister who basically talked about Finland's security from a historic point of view. And I think that really sort of helps us understand this decision to join NATO, this 30-country bloc, of course, of many countries, which includes the U.S. as well. And we have to remember that in the 1940s, Finland fought and lost a war to Russia, Soviet Russia at the time. And since the collapse of the Soviet Union, has had a relationship with Russia, but it's been a slightly complicated relationship in which they've essentially had a position of neutrality, but one of preparedness. Earlier, or just yesterday, we were in essentially a nuclear bomb shelter, which by day is a swimming pool. And we were told by the man who was giving us a tour that there are shelters like this all over Helsinki and indeed the country, because this is a country who remembers that war so vividly, even though it was so long ago. And so this decision to join NATO, of course, comes on the heels of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And people here in Finland, well, their opinion of NATO has changed very quickly. Just before that invasion, most people really didn't think they should join NATO, only around 20-some-odd%. Today, it's around 75%. And I think politically, the leaders here in Finland thought this is the time, and they're now doing it. Lana.
Imtiaz, it's so interesting as you're describing that complicated history. Given that Moscow has also threatened possible retaliation over these NATO applications, how concerning is this to folks there?
Yeah, I think very few people here believe that Russian tanks are going to be rolling over the border here. And remember, it's a very long border that this country shares with Russia, over 800 miles long. But it certainly is going to make things tense with Moscow. Moscow's already announced that it's cutting electricity supplies to Finland. It's not going to hurt this country that much. Only around 10% of electricity supplies from Russia powers this country. But again, it really sort of leads to the fact that we know President Putin, at least on one level, invaded Ukraine because of Ukraine's desire to be part of the NATO alliance. There's many other reasons as well, but that was one component. And NATO, of course, is and sort of plays an outside role in all of this. So the concern now is, well, what's Russia going to do given this border with NATO is now 800 miles longer than it was up until this decision? And right now, we don't know what more Russia can do. Of course, it is involved in this conflict in Ukraine. It's not going great. But for the folks here in Finland, this is the right decision, and it's the one that people in Finland are supporting. And that's why their leaders are going to Brussels this week to formalize their entry into NATO.
Well, NATO member Turkey is making certain demands of Finland and Sweden that might pose some obstacles to the two countries getting their membership. Tell us about those demands and how likely they are to be met.
Yeah, you hit on a very crucial and important point. This is a 30-member alliance, 30 countries, and they all have to agree before another country can join. And Turkey is saying, hang on a second, we might have some issues here. Now, the reasons that they're objecting not just to Finland, but perhaps more specifically Sweden, is for what they've described as that country sheltering what they've described as terrorist groups. Now, you might be wondering, why would Turkey be alarmed as terrorists in Sweden or Finland? Well, it actually has to do with the PKK, which is a Kurdish group. Turkey, of course, sees them as an enemy. Some of them are based in Sweden, possibly some here in Finland as well. And that's where this is coming from. In saying that, when we look at the history of NATO and Turkey's own involvement in NATO, remember, Turkey's been in part of NATO since 1952, that Turkey sort of has a reputation for trying to get concessions from NATO whenever there are sort of issues going on. And there's some suggestion that this could be an attempt to do that, to get concessions from other larger NATO countries in order to not stand in the way of Sweden and indeed Finland joining, because it's very clear that every other country in the NATO alliance wants these countries to be part of it. Just tomorrow, in fact, those U.S. senators who are in Kyiv meeting with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will be here in Finland to meet with the Finnish leaders. So the U.S., of course, very much strongly supporting the expansion of this alliance. But Turkey trying to at least get its way on some levels. What exactly that is at this stage, they haven't played that card yet. But many do believe that for Sweden and Finland, they will be joining this alliance.
So interesting, so consequential. Imtiaz, thank you.